Hey there everyone, Sage Apop. I'm here, founder of the School of Evolutionary Herbalism, and welcome to this week's episode of the Evolutionary Herbalism blog. And in this week's video, I'm going to talk a little bit about using herbs for the mind. You know, it's really common when we're studying plants to, really focus on using them for our body, right? And the common symptoms and ailments and conditions that we deal with as humans. But we also want to remember and consider the fact that herbal medicine does also have an influence on our mind, on our psychological state. And this is predominantly because a number of medicinal plants directly influence our nervous system, and the state of our nervous system, as well as our endocrine system, directly impacts our state of mind. And the power of plants is in their ability to change our physiology, which can then change our state of thinking. But the reverse is also true. I always like to say that all plants have some form of psychological impact because all plants are having an influence. They have an intelligence, they have a consciousness, they have a communication to us. And the more that we pay very close attention to them and become aware of the subtleties in the way in which a plant influences us, we can start to notice the way that they affect our minds. And this is especially true, I've found, over the last decade of working with spagyric forms of herbal medicine, right? Alchemical preparations of the plants, that they definitely influence the mind and definitely help to open us up to learning about ourselves and learning from this life, learning from the experiences that we have both within ourselves and outside of ourselves. And in that way, these herbal medicines can be teachers for us and help us to become better people and help us to find that balance that we're looking for in the body, in the mind, as well as within the soul, and supporting us in our own spiritual development or personal development and becoming the best versions of ourselves. And so in this week's post, I'm just going to be sharing with you some insights into some main categories of herbal medicines that I tend to consider when we're looking at treating the mind. And this question that I was answering was really focused on specifically kind of looping thoughts and when the mind gets kind of stuck on one thing and is just looping back around and kind of incessantly thinking about that one thing over and over and over and over again. What is the meaning of that? What's the constitutional pattern behind that? And what are some categories of remedies and maybe some specific remedies that you can consider for treating that type of psychological pattern? So enjoy this week's post. So Amber is asking, how can you help someone with a stuck looping mind with herbs? Yeah, that's a really great question, Amber. Yeah, so you can absolutely support the mind in general with herbal medicine. Oftentimes when we're thinking of treating the mind, or kind of the psychological patterns or the way we think, there's a couple different categories of plants that usually come to mind to me. The first is, first let me take a step back and kind of share a little bit of how I tend to think through mind stuff, right? So oftentimes when people have a primary complaint of something going on with their mind, more often than not, it's cognitive things, right? Like difficulty concentrating, difficulty focusing. And I tend to think of it in kind of two different categories. On one side, you have what in Ayurveda we might refer to as more of a kapha mind, right? Cold, kind of foggy, unclear, foggy brained, right? Like can't see through the haze. Like everything feels kind of stagnant up in the brain and it's hard to focus. The other side of that would be what we might refer to more as a vata condition in the cognitive faculty, which is more kind of spaced out, ungrounded, scattered all over the place, maybe nervous and anxious. And then we have a couple categories for addressing that. For more the kappa brain, you have things like circulatory stimulants and bitter nootropics, so herbs that will help to bring blood flow to the brain, herbs that will kind of help drain, kind of sometimes like drain fluids, generally speaking, but there's some nootropics that tend to have a little bit more of a bitter taste to them. Oftentimes we want to get more blood flow up into the brain though. So that's where we see things like bacopa is really great. We see things like rosemary is excellent here. Calamus root is quite good. On the other side of it, we have more the vata mind, which responds quite well to nervines, right? Just really the nervine category as a whole to help calm, settle, sedate the mind, basically, get the nervous system to settle down so that it can focus on what's right in front of them. So your question about more of a looping mind, I would put more in that second category. So looping, right? It's movement. It's kind of moving all over the place, but kind of coming back to the same things over and over again. It's not like this like lack of thought, like, oh, I can't even have a clear thought. It's more, I'm having too much thought, too much movement over here, over there, back over here, back over there, right? And it's kind of moving all around. So that's usually where I tend to focus more on sedative nervines. So some of my favorite remedies here, especially for looping thoughts, Passionflower actually is my go-to remedy there, because that is a specific indication for Passionflower, especially like people that can't sleep because of looping thoughts. You know, they just keep kind of going around and around and around in mental circles. That's a really, really excellent remedy there. Passionflower, you actually see the signature of that on the plant itself. So Passionflower is a vine and it has these little tendrils that kind of spiral around like that. And that's the signature for the looping mind. The plant itself kind of makes loops and spirals like that. Really great for mental mental all over the placeness. Also, you know, it is a stronger nervine, so it does help calm anxiety and nervousness and insomnia and things like that. So Passionflower is my go-to there. I also really like skullcap. Now, skullcap, I tend to think of skullcap a little bit more for folks that, you know, like the top of their head is like a little open, like they're really sensitive, be emotionally or spiritually, or maybe like their energy all kind of moves up and out, right? They're really ungrounded. They might be, you know, thinking about kind of far out their stuff a lot, right? And they're not like grounded in reality and very practical. And we might think of it as like if we were thinking of it in terms of like the chakra system, it would be like their crown is too open and all their vital force is moving up and out. So skullcap, kind of like the name sounds, skullcap, it kind of helps to put a cap on it, right? Put a lid on it and bring that vital force down and in. So it's nice and bitter, brings things down, drains things down, sedates the mind, calms the mind, but also helps to kind of replenish and rejuvenate a worn out nervous system, which is quite common for people with that type of pattern because they're so sensitive. Their nervous system just gets on edge a lot and they can be a little bit more prone to burnout. And then on that note, milky oats here is super ideal as well in the way that it will just help to replenish and rejuvenate a worn down nervous system. Those are some of the main remedies that I would consider, but yeah, you can absolutely help people with their mental type cognitive challenges with herbs. Those are kind of some of the main categories that you consider. It is good to take into, take into consideration their constitution, right? So if they're really cold, we want to be a little careful with our colder remedies, etc. So just make sure the energetics of the herbs is as close to in accordance with the constitution of the person, especially if they're going to be working with those plants over time. It's one reason I actually quite like Passionflower, because it's pretty temperature neutral. So you're not really going to shift anyone. It's maybe slightly cool, but it's negligible. It's not going to make a cold person colder by any means. So yeah, great question there, Amber.